The crystal chandelier above seemed to mock Zara Williams as she balanced the heavy silver tray, her worn black shoes slipping slightly on the polished marble floor of the Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom. The elegant guests in their designer gowns and expensive suits moved around her like she was invisible, which was exactly how she preferred it during these high-end catering gigs. But tonight felt different. Tonight, something was about to go terribly wrong. She could feel it in the way her hands trembled slightly as she maneuvered through the crowd of wealthy donors at the Children's Hope Foundation charity gala. The tray held 12 glasses of champagne worth more than her monthly rent, and one wrong step could mean disaster. Her supervisor, Mrs. Chin, had already warned all the waitstaff that this was the most important event of the year, hosted by some mysterious billionaire who demanded perfection. "Watch where you're going," she whispered to herself, the same mantra she'd been repeating all evening. At 28, Zara had been working catering jobs for 3 years, ever since her ex-husband left her and their daughter Emma with nothing but debt and broken promises. These fancy events paid better than her regular diner job, but they also came with more pressure and judgmental stares from people who probably spent more on their shoes than she made in a month. The crowd was thicker near the main entrance, where late arrivals were still making their grand entrances. Zara tried to squeeze between two groups of chattering socialites when she heard someone behind her speaking in a low, commanding voice that made her pause. "The quarterly reports show a 15% increase, but I want to see 20 by next month." She turned slightly to see who possessed such an authoritative tone and found herself looking at the back of a tall man in an impeccably tailored black tuxedo. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and even from behind she could sense an aura of power and wealth that seemed to radiate from him like heat. That's when it happened. A woman in a flowing red dress suddenly stepped backward without looking, bumping directly into Zara. The impact sent her stumbling forward, the tray tilting dangerously in her hands. She tried to regain her balance, but her feet tangled in the woman's dress train, and she pitched forward with nowhere to go but straight into the mysterious man's broad back. Time seemed to slow as the silver tray flew from her hands, all 12 champagne glasses spinning through the air like expensive missiles. The sound of crystal shattering against marble echoed through the ballroom, followed by gasps and shocked murmurs from the nearby guests. Golden champagne splashed across the polished floor, creating a small lake of expensive liquid and broken glass. But worse than the mess was what happened next. The man she'd crashed into slowly turned around, and Zara found herself staring up into the most intense pair of gray eyes she'd ever seen. His face was sharp and angular, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw that gave him an almost dangerous beauty. For a moment, neither of them moved, both frozen in the aftermath of the collision. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Zara breathed, her dark brown eyes wide with horror as she took in the disaster around them. "I didn't mean to, someone bumped into me and—" She dropped to her knees immediately, frantically trying to gather the larger pieces of broken crystal while apologizing continuously. Her black hair, which she'd carefully pinned back for the event, was now falling loose around her shoulders. She could feel the stares of dozens of wealthy guests boring into her, their whispered comments making her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "Miss, please don't," the man said, his voice surprisingly gentle as he crouched down beside her. "You'll cut yourself." But Zara was too panicked to listen. This job was supposed to help her catch up on Emma's school supplies and maybe even buy her daughter the new winter coat she desperately needed. Now she would definitely be fired and probably asked to pay for the damaged glasses too. "I have to clean this up," she said desperately, her hands shaking as she tried to stack the broken pieces. "Mrs. Chin is going to kill me. I can't lose this job. I just can't." The man reached out and gently caught her wrists, stopping her frantic movements. His touch was warm and surprisingly tender, making her look up at him again. Those gray eyes weren't angry like she'd expected. Instead, they seemed concerned, almost protective. "What's your name?" he asked quietly, ignoring the growing crowd of onlookers. "Zara," she whispered, suddenly very aware of how close they were kneeling on the floor together. "Zara Williams." "Well, Zara Williams," he said with the hint of a smile, "accidents happen. And this wasn't entirely your fault." Before she could respond, Mrs. Chin appeared like a storm cloud, her face red with anger and embarrassment. "Zara, what have you done? Do you have any idea how much those glasses cost? How could you be so careless?" Zara scrambled to her feet, nearly slipping on the wet marble. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Chin. Someone bumped into me and I lost my balance. I can pay for the glasses if you—" "Pay for them?" Mrs. Chen's voice rose higher. "Those were imported crystal. Each glass costs more than you make in a week. You're fired and I'm calling security to escort you out immediately." The humiliation was overwhelming. Zara felt tears stinging her eyes as she realized this meant no paycheck tonight, no money for Emma's coat, and probably no reference for future catering jobs. She'd worked so hard to build up her reputation in the industry, and now it was ruined because of one terrible accident. "That won't be necessary," the mysterious man said, standing to his full height. Something in his tone made Mrs. Chen pause, her angry expression shifting to one of confusion and then recognition. "Sir, I didn't realize you were. I mean, this clumsy waitress has caused such a scene," Mrs. Chen stammered, suddenly much more respectful. "The accident wasn't her fault," he said firmly. "And I don't want her fired over something so trivial." Mrs. Chen's mouth opened and closed like a fish, clearly wanting to argue but not daring to contradict this man. Zara looked between them, confused by the sudden shift in dynamics. Who was this guy that could make her fierce supervisor back down so quickly? "I'll cover the cost of the glasses," he continued, pulling out a black credit card that looked different from any Zara had ever seen. "And I think Zara deserves an apology for being blamed for something that wasn't her fault." The crowd around them had grown larger, with guests craning their necks to see what was happening. Zara felt like she was in some kind of strange dream where nothing made sense. Why was this stranger defending her? And why did everyone suddenly seem so deferential to him? "Of course, sir," Mrs. Chen said quickly. "Zara, please return to your duties. And be more careful." As the crowd began to disperse and hotel staff appeared to clean up the mess, Zara found herself alone with her mysterious rescuer again. She looked up at him, trying to understand what had just happened. "Thank you," she said softly. "You didn't have to do that. I don't even know your name." He smiled then, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him, and it transformed his entire face. Gone was the cold, intimidating businessman, replaced by someone who seemed almost boyish in his charm. "Adrian," he said simply. "And you're welcome." Something passed between them in that moment, a connection that Zara couldn't quite name but could definitely feel. It was like recognition, as if some part of her soul had been waiting her entire life to meet this stranger who had just saved her job and her dignity. "I should get back to work," she said reluctantly, suddenly not wanting to leave his side. "Of course," Adrian said, but his eyes never left her face. "Maybe I'll see you around." As Zara walked away to get a new tray, she could feel his gaze following her across the ballroom. She didn't know it yet, but Adrian Cross, billionaire CEO and host of tonight's charity gala, had just fallen in love at first sight with a single mother waitress who'd literally crashed into his life. And nothing would ever be the same for either of them. 2 hours had passed since the champagne incident, and Zara couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious man named Adrian. Every time she moved through the ballroom serving drinks and appetizers, she found herself searching the crowd for his tall figure and those intense gray eyes. It was ridiculous, really. Men like him, wealthy, powerful, sophisticated, didn't look twice at women like her. But the way he'd smiled at her, the gentle way he'd stopped her from cutting herself on the broken glass, kept replaying in her mind. She was refilling champagne glasses at the bar when she felt someone approach behind her. Without turning around, she somehow knew it was him. Her pulse quickened as she set down the bottle and slowly faced him. "How's the rest of your evening going?" Adrian asked, his voice carrying that same warm tone from earlier. Up close, she could see details she'd missed before, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his gray eyes had flecks of silver in them, the fact that his expensive tuxedo couldn't quite hide the athletic build underneath. "Much better, thanks to you," she replied honestly. "I still can't believe you did that. Stood up for me like that." Adrian shrugged as if defending waitresses from angry supervisors was something he did every day. "Like I said, it wasn't your fault. That woman in the red dress should have watched where she was going. Still, most people would have just walked away. Pretended they didn't see anything," Zara said, studying his face. There was something about him that didn't quite fit with the other wealthy guests. He seemed more genuine, less performed. "You're not like the other people here, are you?" Something flickered across Adrian's expression. Surprise, maybe, or appreciation. "What makes you say that?" "I don't know," Zara admitted, feeling bold. "You just seem real. Most of the guests tonight barely look at the staff like we're invisible. But you actually see people." Adrian was quiet for a moment, and Zara worried she'd overstepped. She was just a waitress after all, and he was clearly someone important based on how Mrs. Chen had reacted to him. But then he smiled again, that transformative expression that made her stomach flip. "You're very perceptive, Zara Williams," he said. "Tell me something about yourself. What do you do when you're not serving champagne to charity donors?" The question caught her off guard. In her experience, wealthy men didn't ask personal questions unless they had ulterior motives, and those motives were usually unpleasant. But Adrian's interest seemed genuine, his gray eyes focused entirely on her as if her answer actually mattered to him. "I work at Murphy's Diner downtown," she said cautiously. "This catering thing is just part-time for extra money." "A diner?" Adrian repeated thoughtfully. "I bet you meet interesting people there." Zara laughed, some of her nervousness fading. "You could say that. We get everyone from construction workers to college students to business people grabbing quick lunches. It's not glamorous, but I like it. The regulars become like family." "Family," Adrian said softly, as if the word held special meaning for him. "That sounds nice." There was something wistful in his tone that made Zara look at him more closely. For all his expensive clothes and obvious wealth, he seemed almost lonely. She was about to ask him about it when Mrs. Chen appeared at her elbow. "Zara, table 12 needs more wine," her supervisor said briskly, though her tone was much more polite than usual. She glanced nervously at Adrian. "Sir, I hope everything is satisfactory with the service tonight." "Excellent as always," Adrian replied smoothly. "Zara has been particularly helpful." Mrs. Chen's eyebrows rose slightly at this praise, but she just nodded. "Of course, sir." "Zara, don't keep the guests waiting." As her supervisor walked away, Zara sighed. "I should go. Duty calls." "Wait," Adrian said, reaching into his jacket pocket. For a moment, Zara's heart sank, thinking he was about to offer her money like she was some kind of charity case. Instead he pulled out a simple business card. "I know this might sound strange, but I'd like to see you again. Outside of work." Zara stared at the card in his outstretched hand, her mind racing. The smart thing would be to politely decline. She had enough complications in her life without adding a wealthy man with unclear intentions. But something about Adrian made her want to take the risk. "I have a daughter," she said suddenly, not sure why she felt the need to mention Emma right away. "She's 6. Instead of backing away like most men did when they learned she was a mother, Adrian's expression softened. "What's her name?" "Emma," Zara said, surprised by his reaction. She's everything to me." "I'd like to hear more about her," Adrian said genuinely. "And about you." Against her better judgment, Zara reached for the business card. It was thick, expensive paper with simple black lettering that read Adrian Cross and a phone number. No company name or title, which struck her as odd. "Adrian Cross," she read aloud, testing the name. It sounded familiar somehow, but she couldn't place where she might have heard it. "That's me," he said with a slight smile. "Will you call me?" Before Zara could answer, a commotion near the main stage drew their attention. A distinguished older man in a silver tuxedo was approaching the microphone, and the crowd began to quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen," the man announced, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's sound system. "I'd like to thank you all for attending tonight's Children's Hope Foundation Gala. Your generosity will help countless families in need." Adrian tensed beside her, and Zara noticed his jaw clench slightly. The speaker continued, "Most importantly, I want to express our gratitude to tonight's host, whose vision and leadership made this event possible. Please join me in thanking Adrian Cross, CEO of Cross Industries." The ballroom erupted in applause, and Zara felt the blood drain from her face as she realized what she was hearing. She turned to stare at Adrian Cross, Billionaire CEO, whose expression had become carefully neutral. Their eyes met, and she saw the exact moment he realized she'd connected the dots. The wealthy, powerful businessman she'd been reading about in newspapers and magazines for years was standing right next to her, having just asked for her phone number like he was any regular guy. "Zara," he started to say, but she was already backing away, the business card falling from her numb fingers to flutter to the floor. "You're Adrian Cross," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the continued applause. "The Adrian Cross." "Yes, but that doesn't change anything," he said urgently, stepping toward her. "What we just talked about, the connection we have." But Zara was already shaking her head, the fairy tale moment crashing down around her. Of course he was out of her league. Of course this was all some kind of mistake or misunderstanding. Men like Adrian Cross didn't fall for single mother waitresses. They had supermodels and socialites throwing themselves at their feet. "I have to go," she said, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. How naive could she be? He was probably just being kind to the help, maybe feeling guilty about the champagne incident. "Zara, please," Adrian called after her, but she was already pushing through the crowd toward the service entrance. She spent the rest of the evening in the kitchen, helping with dishes and avoiding the ballroom entirely. Mrs. Chen didn't question her absence, probably assuming she was trying to stay out of trouble after the earlier incident. But even as she scrubbed champagne glasses and tried to focus on her work, Zara couldn't stop thinking about the look in Adrian's eyes when she'd walked away. It hadn't been relief or amusement like she'd expected. It had been something that looked almost like desperation. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Zara found herself wondering what might have happened if she'd stayed to hear what he had to say. But it didn't matter now. By tomorrow, Adrian Cross would have forgotten all about the clumsy waitress who'd literally crashed into his life. Or so she thought. What Zara didn't know was that Adrian had spent the rest of the evening distracted, going through the motions of hosting while his mind replayed every moment of their conversation. He'd never met anyone who looked at him the way she did, not as a bank account or a business opportunity, but as a person. And now she was gone, thinking he'd somehow been dishonest with her when all he'd wanted was to be seen for who he really was, not what he owned. As his driver pulled up to take him home to his empty penthouse, Adrian made a decision. He was going to find Zara Williams again, and this time he was going to make her understand that his feelings had nothing to do with Charity and everything to do with the woman who'd made him feel alive for the first time in years. The game, as they say, was just beginning. Adrian Cross sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor of the Cross Industries building, staring out at the Seattle skyline but seeing nothing. 3 days had passed since the Charity Gala, and he couldn't get Zara Williams out of his mind. Her laugh, the way her brown eyes had lit up when she talked about her daughter, the genuine warmth in her voice when she'd called the diner customers family, it all haunted him. He'd built a billion-dollar empire by being decisive and taking action, but when it came to finding one waitress in a city of 700,000 people, he felt helplessly lost. All he had was her name and the knowledge that she worked at something called Murphy's Diner. "Sir?" His assistant Jennifer's voice came through the intercom, interrupting his thoughts. "Your 2 o'clock is here." Adrian glanced at his calendar and saw a meeting with the marketing department about the new tech acquisition. Important business that would normally have his full attention, but today he could barely focus on anything except the woman who'd walked away from him 3 nights ago. "Reschedule it," he said into the intercom. "Something's come up." There was a pause. In 5 years of working for Adrian, Jennifer had never known him to cancel a meeting without a serious emergency. "Sir, are you feeling all right?" Adrian almost laughed. No, he wasn't all right. He was a 34-year-old billionaire who'd never had trouble getting any woman's attention, yet he couldn't stop thinking about the one who'd literally run away from him. It was ridiculous and completely unlike him, but he couldn't seem to help himself. "I'm fine, Jennifer. Just clear my schedule for the rest of the day." He grabbed his jacket and headed for the elevator, ignoring the curious stares from his employees. Adrian Cross never left the office early, never deviated from his carefully planned schedule, never did anything impulsive. But then again, he'd never met anyone like Zara Williams before. 20 minutes later, he was sitting in his Aston Martin, typing Murphy's Diner Seattle into his phone's GPS. There were 3 restaurants with that name in the city. He'd start with the one downtown and work his way out from there. The first Murphy's Diner was a small place near Pike Place Market, clearly catering to tourists with its overpriced fish and chips and fake Irish decorations. Adrian walked in wearing his usual expensive suit, immediately drawing stares from the other customers. The teenage hostess looked terrified when he asked about Zara Williams. "I don't know anyone by that name," she stammered, clearly intimidated by his presence. The second Murphy's was in the University District, full of college students and professors. The manager, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, was more helpful but had the same answer: no Zara Williams worked there. By the time Adrian reached the third Murphy's Diner, located in a working-class neighborhood south of downtown, the sun was beginning to set. This place looked different from the others, older, more worn around the edges but also more authentic. Through the windows he could see red vinyl booths and a long counter with spinning stools, the kind of place that probably hadn't changed its decor since the 1960s. He pushed through the glass door and a bell chimed overhead. The dinner rush was in full swing, with every booth occupied by families, construction workers still in their hard hats, and elderly couples sharing pieces of pie. The atmosphere was warm and welcoming in a way that his usual 5-star restaurants never managed to be. "Seat yourself anywhere, honey," called a voice from behind the counter. "I'll be right with you." Adrian turned toward the voice and felt his heart stop. There she was, Zara Williams, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a simple blue uniform with Murphy's Diner embroidered on the pocket. She was refilling coffee cups for a table of construction workers, laughing at something one of them had said, completely in her element. For a moment he just watched her work. She moved with practiced efficiency, but there was genuine warmth in every interaction. She knew customers' names, asked about their families, remembered how they liked their coffee. This was what she'd meant about the regulars becoming like family. Zara looked up then and saw him standing by the door. The coffee pot in her hand trembled slightly, and her face went through a series of emotions: surprise, confusion, and then something that might have been panic. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the dinner conversation around them. "We need to talk," Adrian said simply. Zara glanced around the busy diner, clearly torn between her duties and the unexpected appearance of Seattle's most eligible bachelor in her workplace. "I'm working." "I can wait," Adrian said, sliding into an empty booth near the window. "I've got all night." The next hour was torture for both of them. Adrian sat nursing a cup of coffee and a slice of apple pie he didn't want, watching Zara work while she tried to pretend he wasn't there. But he could feel her awareness of him in every movement, the way she avoided looking in his direction, the tension in her shoulders whenever she passed his table. Finally, the dinner rush began to slow, and an older man with graying hair and kind eyes emerged from the kitchen. He wore a stained apron and had the look of someone who'd been cooking for decades. "Zara, you okay?" he asked, glancing curiously at Adrian. "You seem distracted tonight." "I'm fine, Murphy," she said quickly. "Just tired." Murphy, apparently the owner, studied Adrian with the protective instincts of a father figure. "This gentleman giving you any trouble?" "No trouble," Adrian said before Zara could answer. "I'm just hoping to have a conversation with Zara when she gets off work." "Is that what you want, Z?" Murphy asked, using what was clearly a nickname. The concern in his voice was obvious. Zara looked between the two men, then sighed. "My shift ends in 20 minutes, she told Adrian. "We can talk then. But only for a few minutes. I need to get home to Emma." Adrian nodded, relief flooding through him. "Thank you." Those 20 minutes felt like hours. Adrian watched Zara finish her closing duties, counting the register and wiping down tables with the same care she'd shown the customers. When she finally hung up her apron and grabbed her purse, he stood to follow her outside. The evening air was cool, and Zara wrapped her cardigan tighter around her shoulders as they stood on the sidewalk in front of the diner. Under the streetlight, Adrian could see the exhaustion in her face, the way her shoulders sagged slightly now that her shift was over. "How did you find me?" she asked without preamble. "There are only 3 Murphy's diners in Seattle," Adrian said. "You were my third stop." Zara stared at him. "You spent your entire day looking for me?" "I needed to explain," Adrian said. "About the other night. About who I am." "I know who you are," Zara said quietly. "I looked you up after I got home. Adrian Cross, Billionaire CEO, one of Seattle's most eligible bachelors according to half a dozen magazines. The question is, what do you want with someone like me?" The hurt in her voice made Adrian's chest ache. "Someone like you? Zara, you're a single mother who works 2 jobs to make ends meet," she interrupted. "A high school graduate who never went to college because she got pregnant at 22. A woman who shops at thrift stores and lives in a 1-bedroom apartment with her 6-year-old daughter." "You're the most genuine person I've met in years," Adrian said firmly. "You're kind and hardworking and beautiful, and when you look at me you see me, not my bank account." Zara's expression softened slightly, but she shook her head. "Adrian, be realistic. We're from completely different worlds. You probably spend more on lunch than I make in a week." "So what?" Adrian stepped closer, his gray eyes intense. "I didn't choose to be born wealthy, Zara. And you didn't choose to struggle. But we both choose how we treat people, and you're extraordinary." For a moment, Zara looked like she might believe him. But then she stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself defensively. "I can't do this," she said. "Emma has to be my priority. I can't get involved with someone whose life is so complicated, who has people following him around with cameras and reporters asking questions." "What if I told you I'd give all of that up?" Adrian said impulsively. "What if money didn't matter?" Zara looked at him sadly. "But it does matter. It always matters. Men like you don't end up with women like me, Adrian. That's just not how the world works." Before he could argue, she was walking away toward the bus stop, leaving Adrian standing alone under the streetlight. He watched her board the number 47 bus, her tired figure disappearing behind the tinted windows. But as the bus pulled away, Adrian made himself a promise. He wasn't giving up. Zara Williams might think they were from different worlds, but he was going to prove to her that love didn't care about bank accounts or social status. He just had to figure out how to do it without scaring her away again. Back in his car, Adrian sat in the Murphy's diner parking lot for a long time, thinking. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. Jennifer? It's Adrian. I need you to research something for me. A woman named Zara Williams works at Murphy's Diner on 5th Avenue. I want to know everything: where she lives, where her daughter goes to school, what her story is. But be discreet about it. There was a pause. Sir, that sounds like... Like what? Like you're stalking someone? Adrian closed his eyes. I'm trying to help someone. There's a difference. Is there? Jennifer asked quietly. The question haunted Adrian all the way home to his empty penthouse. Was he helping, or was he just a wealthy man who wasn't used to being told no? The line between romantic persistence and harassment could be thin, and the last thing he wanted was to make Zara's life more difficult. But as he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Adrian couldn't shake the memory of the way Zara had looked at him in those first moments at the gala, before she knew who he was, when she'd seen just a man who'd been kind to her. That was the person he wanted to be for her. Not Adrian Cross the billionaire, but just Adrian. The man who would move heaven and earth to make her smile. Now he just had to figure out how to prove it. 2 weeks had passed since Adrian had found Zara at Murphy's Diner, and she'd managed to convince herself that their strange encounter was over. Billionaires didn't pursue waitresses from the wrong side of town, no matter what romantic movies suggested. Adrian Cross had probably already forgotten her name and moved on to someone more suitable to his lifestyle. So when she walked into the diner for her morning shift and saw a familiar figure sitting at the counter, her first instinct was to turn around and walk right back out. "Morning, Z," Murphy called from behind the grill, apparently oblivious to her frozen state. "Your friend's been waiting for about 20 minutes. Says he's not in any hurry." Adrian turned on his stool, and Zara felt that same jolt of attraction she'd experienced at the gala. He looked different in the daylight streaming through the diner's windows, less intimidating, more approachable. Instead of an expensive suit, he wore dark jeans and a simple gray sweater that somehow made his eyes look even more striking. "Hi, Zara," he said quietly, his voice carrying that same gentle tone from their first meeting. "What are you doing here?" she asked, glancing around nervously. The morning crowd was lighter than dinner rush, but there were still several regulars who would definitely notice and remember Seattle's most famous bachelor having breakfast at their neighborhood diner. "I was hoping you'd have coffee with me," Adrian said, "before your shift starts." Zara looked at the clock above the register. She was 15 minutes early, which had been intentional. She'd wanted extra time to prepare for another long day of double shifts. But sitting down with Adrian Cross was definitely not what she'd had in mind. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said, reaching for her apron. "Please," Adrian said simply. "Just coffee. 5 minutes." Something in his tone made her pause. He didn't sound like the commanding CEO she'd read about in business magazines. He sounded almost vulnerable. Against her better judgment, Zara found herself sliding onto the stool next to him. Murphy, who'd been watching the exchange with obvious curiosity, poured her a cup of coffee without being asked. "You two know each other?" he asked, his protective instincts clearly on high alert. "We met at a charity event," Zara said carefully. "Adrian, this is Murphy. He owns the diner." "Nice to meet you," Adrian said, extending his hand. "You've got a great place here." Murphy shook his hand but continued studying Adrian with shrewd eyes. After 30 years of running a neighborhood diner, he could read people pretty well, and something about this well-dressed stranger had him concerned. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything, Z," Murphy said pointedly, making it clear he'd be keeping an eye on things. When they were relatively alone, Zara turned to Adrian. "Seriously, what are you doing here? This isn't exactly your crowd." Adrian looked around the diner, taking in the worn vinyl booths, the faded photographs of old Seattle on the walls, the mismatched coffee cups and plates. "Actually, I like it. It feels real." "Real?" Zara repeated skeptically. "As opposed to what?" "As opposed to the restaurants I usually go to, where everything is perfect and sterile and nobody actually talks to each other," Adrian said. "Where the waiters call you sir, and act like they're afraid of you." Zara studied his face, surprised by the loneliness she heard in his voice. "Is that really how you live?" "Most of the time," Adrian admitted. "Until I met you." Before Zara could respond, the bell above the door chimed, and her attention was diverted by the arrival of one of her regular customers, Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who came in every morning at exactly 8:30 for coffee and a blueberry muffin. "Morning, Mrs. P," Zara called automatically, already reaching for the coffee pot. "The usual?" "You know it, dear," Mrs. Patterson replied, settling into her favorite booth. "And how's that sweet daughter of yours?" "She's good," Zara said, pouring the coffee. "Started first grade last week." She loves her teacher. As Zara moved efficiently around the diner, greeting regulars and taking orders, Adrian watched with fascination. This was the woman he'd glimpsed at the charity gala, confident, caring, completely in her element. She knew everyone's name, remembered their preferences, asked about their families with genuine interest. "She's special, that one," Murphy said quietly, appearing beside Adrian with a plate of eggs and toast. "Been working here 3 years, never missed a shift, never complained. Takes care of everyone like their family." "What happened to Emma's father?" Adrian asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. Murphy's expression hardened. "That's not my story to tell. But I will say this, any man who walks away from Zara and that little girl is a fool." The protective tone in Murphy's voice was unmistakable, and Adrian realized that Zara had found a father figure in this gruff diner owner. It made him wonder what other relationships she'd built, what kind of support system she had beyond her job. When the morning rush slowed down, Zara returned to the counter, refilling Adrian's coffee cup without being asked. "You don't have to babysit me," she said quietly. "I'm sure you have important CEO things to do." "Actually, I cleared my schedule today," Adrian said. "I was hoping you might show me around the neighborhood after your shift." Zara stared at him. "You cleared your schedule? Don't you run a billion-dollar company?" "I have excellent people working for me," Adrian said with a slight smile. "Besides, this is more important." "Walking around my neighborhood is more important than running cross industries?" Zara asked incredulously. "Getting to know you is more important than anything," Adrian said simply. The sincerity in his voice made Zara's breath catch. She'd been expecting smooth lines or obvious attempts to impress her with his wealth and power. Instead, he was looking at her like she was the most important person in the world. "Adrian," she started, but he held up a hand. "Before you say no, let me tell you what I've figured out about you," he said. "You work double shifts to support your daughter. You probably send most of your paycheck to rent and Emma's needs, which means you never do anything for yourself. When's the last time you had an afternoon off? When's the last time someone took care of you instead of the other way around?" Zara's throat tightened at his accurate assessment of her life. "That's what being a mother means. Emma comes first." "I'm not suggesting otherwise," Adrian said gently. "But even mothers need a break sometimes. And I'm guessing you don't have family nearby to help." He was right, and they both knew it. Zara's parents had died in a car accident when she was 20, and her ex-husband's family had cut off contact after the divorce. It was just her and Emma against the world, which was exactly how she preferred it. Depending on other people only led to disappointment. "What exactly are you suggesting?" she asked cautiously. "Let me buy you lunch," Adrian said. "Somewhere nice but not fancy. We can talk, get to know each other without any pressure. If you're not comfortable, we can leave anytime." Zara glanced at the clock. Her shift ended at 2, and she didn't have to pick up Emma from school until 3:30. She could catch the bus to Lincoln Elementary and still have time for a quick lunch. "1 hour," she said finally. "And somewhere in this neighborhood. I'm not getting in your fancy car and going to some 5-star restaurant where I don't belong." Adrian's face lit up with the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "Deal. Do you know anywhere good around here?" Despite herself, Zara found herself smiling back. "There's a little Italian place 2 blocks down. Nothing fancy, but the food is amazing." "Perfect," Adrian said, pulling out his wallet to pay for his breakfast. "On one condition," Zara added quickly. "We split the check. I'm not a charity case." The flash of hurt that crossed Adrian's face surprised her. "I never thought you were. But I asked you to lunch, so I'd like to pay. It's not about charity, it's about being a gentleman." Something in his tone made Zara reconsider. Maybe she was being too defensive, reading insults where none were intended. "Okay," she said quietly. "But nothing expensive." "I promise," Adrian said. "Just 2 people having lunch and conversation." As Zara finished her shift, she found herself looking forward to their lunch more than she wanted to admit. Adrian had been nothing but respectful and kind, and there was something about him that made her want to believe his interest was genuine. What she didn't know was that Adrian had been coming to the diner every morning for the past week, learning her schedule, getting to know Murphy and the other regulars. He discovered that Zara worked double shifts most days, that she walked to work to save bus fare, that she often skipped lunch to save money. More than that, he'd learned that everyone who met Zara Williams fell a little bit in love with her kindness and strength. Murphy treated her like a daughter, the regular customers asked about Emma like she was their own granddaughter, and even the delivery drivers who brought supplies to the diner always had a smile and a friendly word for her. Adrian Cross had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from him, his money, his influence, his connections. But Zara Williams was the first person he'd met who seemed to want nothing from him except maybe to be left alone. And that, paradoxically, made him want to give her everything. As they walked toward the Italian restaurant, Adrian felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not for a business deal or a successful acquisition, but for something much more precious and much more fragile. The chance to be loved for who he was, not what he owned. The little Italian restaurant, Mama Rosa's, was exactly the kind of place Zara had promised: nothing fancy, but warm and welcoming, with red checkered tablecloths and the smell of garlic and basil filling the air. Adrian found himself genuinely relaxed for the first time in weeks as they settled into a corner booth. "This is perfect," he said, looking around at the family photos covering the walls and the handwritten menu specials on a chalkboard. "How did you find this place?" "Emma and I come here sometimes for special occasions," Zara said, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I mean, not very often. Just when I've had a good week with tips or—" "You don't have to explain," Adrian said gently. "I'm glad you shared this with me." Their conversation flowed easier than Zara had expected. Adrian asked thoughtful questions about her life, her dreams, her relationship with Emma, and actually listened to the answers instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. When she mentioned Emma's love of books, his whole face lit up. "She wants to be a writer?" he asked. "She says she wants to write stories about princesses who save themselves," Zara said with obvious pride. "She's already filling up notebooks with her adventures." "Smart girl," Adrian said. "She gets that from her mother." The compliment made Zara's cheeks warm. "What about you? Any siblings?" "Kids." Something shadowed crossed Adrian's expression. "No siblings. No kids. No wife or girlfriend, in case you were wondering." "I wasn't," Zara lied, then felt guilty about it. "Okay, maybe I was wondering a little." Adrian's smile returned. "I'm 34 and I've never been married. The women I usually meet are more interested in my portfolio than my personality." "That must be lonely," Zara said softly. "It was," Adrian agreed. "Until I crashed into a waitress at a charity gala." Their eyes met across the table, and Zara felt that same electric connection from their first meeting. This time she didn't look away. "Adrian," she started, but he reached across the table and gently touched her hand. "I know this is complicated," he said. "I know our lives are different. But I can't stop thinking about you, Zara. The way you laughed with those construction workers at the diner, the way you talk about Emma, the way you make everyone around you feel important. I've never met anyone like you." Zara stared down at their joined hands. His was larger, softer than hers, without the small scars and calluses that came from years of waitressing. But his touch was warm and comforting in a way that made her want to lean into it. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "Of me?" "Of this," she said, gesturing between them. "Of what happens when you realize I'm not as interesting as you think I am. Of Emma getting attached to someone who's going to disappear." Adrian's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "What if I told you I'm not going anywhere?" "You say that now," Zara said, pulling her hand back. "But you don't really know me. You don't know what it's like to be up all night with a 6-year-old, or to worry about making rent, or to explain to your daughter why her daddy doesn't call anymore." The pain in her voice made Adrian's chest ache. "Tell me about Emma's father." Zara was quiet for so long that Adrian thought she wasn't going to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "His name was Derek. We got married when I was 22 because I was pregnant and we thought it was the right thing to do. He was charming and handsome and told me he loved me." She paused, staring at her coffee cup. "But he didn't love responsibility, or sleepless nights, or the way having a baby changes everything." "When did he leave?" "Emma was 3. One day I came home from work and found a note saying he'd met someone else, someone without baggage." Zara's laugh was bitter. That's what he called his own daughter. Baggage. Adrian felt a surge of anger toward a man he'd never met. How could anyone walk away from Zara and Emma? How could anyone be so cruel? "I'm sorry," he said simply. "Don't be. We're better off without him. Emma doesn't even remember him, which is probably for the best." Zara looked up at Adrian with fierce determination. "But that's why I can't let people into our lives casually. Emma's been hurt enough." "I understand," Adrian said. "And I'm not asking you to introduce me to her tomorrow. I'm just asking for a chance to prove that not all men are like Derek." Something in his tone made Zara study his face more carefully. "You really mean that, don't you?" "I've never meant anything more in my life," Adrian said. They were interrupted by the arrival of their food, lasagna for Zara and chicken parmesan for Adrian. but the conversation continued to flow naturally. Adrian told her about growing up wealthy but lonely, with parents who were more focused on their social status than their son. Zara shared stories about Emma's personality, her fierce independence and creative spirit. "She sounds amazing," Adrian said. "I'd love to meet her someday. When you're ready." "Maybe," Zara said cautiously. But for the first time she was actually considering it. As they finished their meal, Adrian glanced at his watch. "What time do you need to pick up Emma?" 3:30, Zara said, then looked surprised when she realized it was already 3 o'clock. "Oh no, I need to go. The bus." "Let me drive you," Adrian offered immediately. "No," Zara said quickly. "I can't show up at Emma's school in your expensive car. People will talk and Emma will ask questions I'm not ready to answer." Adrian nodded, understanding but disappointed. "Can I at least walk you to the bus stop?" As they left the restaurant, Zara found herself reluctant for their time together to end. Lunch with Adrian had been the most relaxed she'd felt in months, maybe years. He made her feel interesting and valued in a way she'd almost forgotten was possible. "Thank you for lunch," she said as they reached the bus stop. "And for listening. It's been a long time since I had an adult conversation that didn't involve coffee orders or Emma's homework." "Thank you for giving me a chance," Adrian replied. "I know I'm not exactly what you expected." "No," Zara agreed. "You're not." The bus was approaching, and Zara knew she had to make a decision. She could end this now, go back to her safe, predictable life with just her and Emma. Or she could take a risk on this man who seemed to see something in her that she'd stopped seeing in herself. "Adrian," she said impulsively as the bus pulled up, "would you like to have coffee tomorrow morning? Before my shift starts." His face lit up like Christmas morning. "I'd love that. Same time as today." "And Adrian?" She paused at the bus door. "Don't research me or have your people look into my background or anything creepy like that. If you want to know something about me, just ask." Adrian laughed, looking slightly embarrassed. "Deal. No research." As the bus pulled away, Zara watched Adrian through the window until he disappeared from view. She was taking a huge risk, she knew that. But for the first time since Derek left, she was willing to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved something good in her life. What she didn't know was that Adrian was already planning ways to show her just how special she was, without overwhelming her or scaring her away. He wanted to be part of her world, not drag her into his. And for a man who was used to getting everything he wanted through money and power, learning to win someone's heart with patience and genuine caring was going to be the greatest challenge of his life. But as he walked back to his car, Adrian Cross had never been more motivated to succeed at anything. 3 weeks had passed since that first lunch at Mama Rosa's, and what had started as morning coffee had evolved into a routine that Zara found herself looking forward to more than she cared to admit. Adrian arrived at Murphy's diner every morning at 8 o'clock sharp, ordered coffee and whatever Murphy recommended for breakfast, and spent an hour talking with Zara during the slow period before the lunch rush. He never pressured her for more time, never made her feel guilty about keeping their relationship casual, and had become genuinely friendly with Murphy and the regular customers. Mrs. Patterson had started asking about that nice young man every day, and even the gruff construction workers had warmed up to him after he'd picked up their breakfast tab one morning without making a big deal about it. Zara was beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, she'd found someone who could fit into her carefully structured life without disrupting the delicate balance she'd worked so hard to create for herself and Emma. That illusion came crashing down on a Tuesday morning in October. Zara was refilling the coffee dispenser when she noticed Murphy reading the business section of the Seattle Times, his forehead creased with concentration. This wasn't unusual. Murphy liked to keep up with local news, but something about his expression made her pause. "Everything okay, Murphy?" she asked, wiping down the counter nearby. "Just reading about some big business deal," Murphy said absently. "This tech company got bought out for $3 billion. Can you imagine that kind of money?" Zara glanced at the newspaper more out of politeness than real interest. She'd never been much for business news, but the headline caught her attention. Cross Industries acquires TechFlow in largest deal of the year. Her blood turned to ice as she read the first paragraph, which described Adrian Cross as the enigmatic CEO known for his ruthless business tactics and ability to turn struggling companies into profitable ventures. "Murphy," she said carefully, trying to keep her voice steady, "can I see that paper for a minute?" "Sure, honey," Murphy said, handing it over without looking up from his crossword puzzle. Zara's hands trembled as she unfolded the business section fully. There, taking up half the page, was a photograph of Adrian shaking hands with another businessman in what was obviously a boardroom. He was wearing an expensive suit, his expression cold and professional, looking every inch the powerful billionaire CEO. But it was the smaller photos accompanying the article that made her feel sick. Pictures of Adrian at various high society events, gallery openings, charity galas, exclusive parties, always with a different beautiful woman on his arm. The captions identified them as models, socialites, actresses, all of them stunning and sophisticated in ways that Zara could never be. The article went on to describe Adrian's legendary focus on business above all else, and quoted anonymous sources calling him brilliant but ruthless, and someone who always gets what he wants no matter the cost. This was the real Adrian Cross. Not the gentle, thoughtful man who spent his mornings drinking coffee at a neighborhood diner, but a corporate shark who probably saw her as nothing more than an amusing diversion from his real life. Zara? Murphy's voice seemed to come from very far away. You look like you've seen a ghost. She couldn't answer. All she could think about were the photos of Adrian with those other women, the description of his ruthless business practices, the casual way the article mentioned his confirmed bachelor status, and legendary ability to compartmentalize his personal and professional lives. Compartmentalize. That's all she was, a compartment. A fun little side project to make him feel good about himself while he continued his real life of corporate deals and beautiful women who actually belonged in his world. I need some air, she managed to say, practically running toward the back exit of the diner. She found herself in the alley behind Murphy's, gasping for breath like she'd just run a marathon. How could she have been so stupid? How could she have let herself believe that someone like Adrian Cross could genuinely be interested in someone like her? The worst part was that she'd been starting to trust him. Starting to think about maybe, eventually, introducing him to Emma. Starting to believe that she might actually deserve someone who looked at her the way Adrian did. But it was all fake. It had to be. Men like Adrian Cross didn't fall for single mother waitresses. They had brief affairs with them, maybe, before returning to their real lives and their real relationships with appropriate women. Zara? She spun around to find Adrian standing at the mouth of the alley, his face creased with concern. He was wearing jeans and a sweater, looking exactly like the man she'd been falling for, but now she could see the expensive watch on his wrist, the perfect haircut, the subtle signs of wealth that she'd somehow overlooked before. What are you doing back here? He asked, stepping closer. Murphy said you seemed upset. Zara held up the newspaper, her hands shaking with anger and hurt. When were you going to tell me about this? Adrian's eyes went to the headline, and she saw the exact moment he realized what had happened. His face went carefully blank, the same expression she'd seen in the business photo. Zara, I can explain. Explain what? She demanded. That you've been lying to me for weeks? That while you've been playing dress up in your casual clothes and pretending to be a regular guy, you've actually been making billion-dollar deals and dating supermodels? It's not like that, Adrian said urgently. Those photos are old, from before I met you. And I never lied to you about who I am. You never told me the truth either, Zara shot back. You let me think you were just some successful businessman, not the Adrian Cross who's on the cover of Fortune magazine and dates actresses. Because I knew you'd react exactly like this, Adrian said, his voice rising slightly. I knew you'd assume the worst and shut me out before giving me a chance to explain. Explain what? That this has all been some kind of game for you? That you've been slumming it with the working-class girl for kicks? The hurt that flashed across Adrian's face looked genuine, but Zara didn't trust her judgment anymore. She'd been wrong about everything else. Is that really what you think of me? He asked quietly. I don't know what to think, Zara said, tears stinging her eyes. I don't know who you really are, Adrian. The man in these photos looks nothing like the person I've been having coffee with every morning. I'm the same person, Adrian insisted. The money doesn't change who I am. Doesn't it? Zara challenged. This article says you're ruthless, that you always get what you want no matter the cost. Is that what this is? You wanted me, so you created this fake persona to get me? Nothing about my feelings for you is fake, Adrian said desperately. Yes, I have money. Yes, I run a large company. But when I'm with you, I'm just Adrian. The man who thinks you're the most incredible woman he's ever met. The man who's been photographed with dozens of other women, Zara said, gesturing to the newspaper. How do I know I'm not just this month's charity case? Adrian flinched as if she'd slapped him. Because you know me, Zara. You spent time with me, talked to me, seen how I am with you. Don't let some newspaper article erase what we've built together. But Zara was already shaking her head, backing away from him. We haven't built anything together. You built a fantasy and I was stupid enough to believe in it. Zara, please. I have to get back to work, she said, pushing past him toward the diner's back door. And I think it would be better if you didn't come back. You don't mean that, Adrian said, following her. She turned to face him one last time, and the devastation in her eyes made his chest feel like it was caving in. I mean every word, she said firmly. Whatever this was, it's over. Go back to your real life, Adrian. Find someone who actually belongs in it. As she disappeared into the diner, Adrian stood alone in the alley, holding the crumpled newspaper and feeling like his world had just collapsed around him. He'd known this moment would come eventually, the moment when his wealth and status would become an obstacle instead of an asset. But he'd hoped that by then, Zara would trust him enough to see past the headlines and photographs to the man underneath. The man who would give up everything he owned for just one more morning of coffee and conversation with her. Inside the diner, Zara leaned against the kitchen door, trying to compose herself before Murphy or the customers saw her cry. She'd done the right thing, she told herself. Better to end it now before she got in any deeper, before Emma got involved, before she made the mistake of falling completely in love with a man who lived in a different universe. But as she wiped away her tears and returned to work, Zara couldn't shake the memory of the pain in Adrian's eyes when she'd walked away. For just a moment he'd looked as heartbroken as she felt. Almost like his feelings had been real after all. Adrian sat in his penthouse office, staring out at the Seattle skyline without really seeing it. 2 weeks had passed since Zara had discovered his true identity, and he felt like he was slowly going insane. Every morning at 8 o'clock, his body wanted to drive to Murphy's diner, but his mind knew there was no point. She'd made it clear she never wanted to see him again. He'd thrown himself into work with a vengeance, closing deals and making decisions with a cold efficiency that had his employees walking on eggshells. But no amount of corporate success could fill the hollow ache in his chest where his heart used to be. Sir? Jennifer's voice came through the intercom. Your 3 o'clock is here. Adrian glanced at his calendar and saw a meeting with the board of directors about the quarterly projections. Important business that would have commanded his full attention just a month ago, but now felt meaningless. Send them in, he said automatically. As his boardroom filled with expensive suits and quarterly reports, Adrian found his mind wandering to Zara. Was she working the lunch shift today? Had she found someone to cover his usual morning conversation, or was she simply relieved to have her routine back to normal? Did she ever think about him, or had she dismissed their time together as easily as she dismissed him? Adrian? The voice of his CFO, Richard Walsh, cut through his thoughts. What do you think about the Henderson acquisition? Adrian realized he'd been staring out the window for the past 10 minutes while his board presented their quarterly analysis. I'm sorry, what was the question? Richard looked surprised. Adrian Cross never lost focus during business meetings, never let his attention wander from the matters at hand. The Henderson Group acquisition. Should we move forward with the offer? Handle it however you think best, Adrian said, gathering his papers. I trust your judgment. The room fell silent. Adrian Cross trusting other people's judgment without reviewing every detail himself was unheard of. Richard exchanged worried glances with the other board members. Sir, are you feeling all right? Richard asked carefully. I'm fine, Adrian lied. Just tired. Reschedule any non-essential meetings for the rest of the week. As he left the boardroom, Adrian could hear the whispered conversation starting behind him. By tomorrow there would probably be rumors about his health, his mental state, his ability to continue running the company. None of it mattered to him anymore. Meanwhile, across town at Murphy's diner, Zara was having her own struggles with focus and routine. She'd thrown herself into work with the same desperate energy Adrian was using, picking up extra shifts and staying busy every waking moment to avoid thinking about the mornings when Adrian would sit at the counter and make her laugh. You're going to burn yourself out, Z, Murphy warned as she wiped down tables for the 3rd time in an hour. When's the last time you took a day off? I don't need a day off, Zara said, scrubbing at an imaginary stain on the counter. I need to stay busy. You need to talk to someone, Murphy said gently. You've been like a ghost for 2 weeks. What happened with that Adrian fellow? He seemed like a good guy. Zara's hand stilled on the counter. She hadn't told Murphy the whole truth about Adrian's identity, just that they'd had a disagreement and wouldn't be seeing each other anymore. He wasn't who I thought he was. People rarely are, honey, Murphy said. The question is whether who he really was is better or worse than who you thought he was. Before Zara could answer, the bell above the door chimed, and she looked up hopefully despite herself. But it was just Mrs. Patterson for her usual afternoon coffee, not the tall figure with gray eyes that her traitorous heart kept watching for. Afternoon, dear, Mrs. Patterson said, settling into her usual booth. Haven't seen that nice young man lately. I hope you didn't chase him away with your stubborn streak. Zara forced a smile as she poured the elderly woman's coffee. He's just been busy with work. Mrs. Patterson said skeptically. Well, when you see him, tell him I said hello. He had good taste in women, that one did. The compliment made Zara's throat tight with unshed tears. She excused herself to the kitchen, where she could compose herself away from the concerned eyes of the customers who'd grown to care about her. That evening, as she picked up Emma from after-school care, Zara tried to push thoughts of Adrian out of her mind and focus on what really mattered: her daughter. "Mommy, you look sad," Emma observed as they walked home from the bus stop. At 6 years old, she was frighteningly perceptive about her mother's moods. "I'm just tired, sweetheart," Zara said, squeezing Emma's small hand. "Is it because the nice man stopped coming to breakfast?" Emma asked innocently. Zara stopped walking. "What nice man?" "The one with the gray eyes who always smiled when he looked at you," Emma said matter-of-factly. "I saw him through the window when I walked by the diner with Mrs. Rodriguez. He made you happy." Zara stared at her daughter, realizing that even Emma had noticed the change in her behavior since Adrian had been coming around. She'd been happier those few weeks, lighter somehow, and apparently it had been obvious to everyone around her. "Sometimes adults have disagreements, Emma," she said carefully. "It doesn't mean anyone did anything wrong." "Did you have a disagreement with the gray-eyes man?" Emma asked. "Something like that," Zara admitted. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the serious concentration she brought to all adult problems. "When I have disagreements with Lily at school, Mrs. Henderson says we should talk about our feelings and say sorry if we need to." "It's more complicated than that, baby," Zara said softly. "Why?" Emma asked with 6-year-old logic. "If you miss him and he misses you, why don't you just say sorry and be friends again?" The simple question hit Zara like a physical blow. Did she miss Adrian? Yes, desperately. Did he miss her? She honestly didn't know. Maybe he'd already moved on to someone more suitable, someone who wouldn't run away at the first sign of complication. But what if Emma was right? What if the solution was as simple as an honest conversation about feelings? That night, after Emma was asleep, Zara sat on her small couch and thought about everything that had happened. She'd been so hurt and angry when she discovered Adrian's true identity that she hadn't really listened to his explanations. She'd just assumed the worst and shut him out completely. But looking back on their weeks together, she couldn't deny that his feelings had seemed genuine. The way he'd looked at her, the careful attention he'd paid to her stories about Emma, the respectful way he'd never pushed for more than she was ready to give, none of that felt like an act. And she'd seen the photos of him with other women, but as he'd said, they could have been old. She'd never actually asked him about his dating life, just assumed the worst based on magazine articles and gossip columns. Maybe she'd made a terrible mistake. The next morning, Zara found herself looking up every few minutes as customers came and went, hoping against hope that Adrian might walk through the door. But 8 o'clock came and went, then 9, then 10, and there was no sign of him. "He's not coming back, is he?" she asked Murphy during a quiet moment. Murphy looked at her with knowing eyes. "Would you, if someone you cared about told you never to come back?" Zara felt tears sting her eyes. "I was scared, Murphy. I thought he was lying to me." "Was he?" Murphy asked gently. "I don't know," Zara admitted. "Maybe not about the important things." "Then maybe," Murphy said, "it's time to find out for sure." As Zara served customers and went through the motions of her routine, she made a decision. She was going to find Adrian Cross and have the honest conversation they should have had 2 weeks ago. She was going to listen to his side of the story with an open mind and heart. And maybe, if she was very lucky and very brave, she might discover that some fairy tales were real after all. But first, she had to figure out how to reach a billionaire CEO who probably never wanted to see her again. It started with a fever on a Thursday night. Emma woke up crying, her small body burning with heat, and Zara knew immediately that this wasn't just a typical childhood cold. Her motherly instincts, finely tuned after 6 years of single parenting, screamed that something was seriously wrong. "My tummy hurts, Mommy," Emma whimpered as Zara checked her temperature. The thermometer read 103.2 degrees, high enough to send a chill of fear through Zara's entire body. "I know, sweetheart," Zara soothed, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. "We're going to get you feeling better." She spent the night in Emma's room, applying cool washcloths and giving her daughter small sips of water. But by morning, Emma was worse. The fever hadn't broken, and she was complaining of severe stomach pain and nausea. Zara called in sick to both of her jobs and took Emma to the emergency room at Seattle Children's Hospital. The waiting room was crowded with other worried parents and sick children, and it took 4 hours before they were finally seen by a doctor. Dr. Sarachin was young but thorough, examining Emma with gentle hands while asking Zara detailed questions about the symptoms. After blood tests and an ultrasound, she delivered news that made Zara's world tilt on its axis. Emma has appendicitis, Dr. Chin explained, her voice professional but kind. We need to operate immediately to remove her appendix before it ruptures. Surgery? Zara's voice came out as a whisper. But she's only 6. I know this is scary, Dr. Chin said. But appendectomies are very routine procedures, especially when we catch them early like this. Emma should recover completely with minimal complications. But as Dr. Chin continued explaining the procedure, Zara's mind was already racing ahead to the practical concerns. Surgery meant hospital bills. Recovery time meant missing work. And if there were any complications, what about insurance? Zara asked, hating that she had to think about money when her daughter was lying on a hospital bed in pain. Dr. Chen's expression became more guarded. Our financial counselor will speak with you about that. The important thing right now is getting Emma the care she needs. 2 hours later, as Emma was being prepped for surgery, Zara sat in the consultation room across from Janet Morrison, the hospital's financial counselor. The numbers on the papers in front of her might as well have been written in a foreign language. The surgery itself will cost approximately $15,000, Janet said gently. Your insurance will cover about 60%, leaving you responsible for roughly $6,000. But if there are any complications or if Emma needs to stay longer than anticipated. Zara stopped listening. $6,000 might as well have been $6 million. She had maybe $300 in her savings account and was already behind on this month's rent. How was she supposed to come up with that kind of money? We do offer payment plans, Janet continued, and there are some charity programs you might qualify for. What kind of charity programs? Zara asked, swallowing her pride. Well, there's the Children's Hope Foundation that helps families in financial need. They've been very generous in covering medical costs for qualifying families. The name hit Zara like a physical blow. The Children's Hope Foundation, the same charity gala where she'd first met Adrian. The same organization he'd been hosting that night when she'd crashed into his life. I'll take whatever applications you have, Zara said quietly. But even as she filled out the paperwork, Zara knew it would take weeks to process the applications, and Emma needed surgery now. She was going to have to find another way to pay for her daughter's care. The surgery went well. Emma's appendix was removed without complications, and she was moved to a recovery room where Zara could sit beside her bed and hold her small hand while she slept off the anesthesia. She did beautifully, Dr. Chin assured her. She should be able to go home tomorrow if all goes well tonight. Relief flooded through Zara, followed immediately by renewed worry about the bills that would be coming. She'd already missed 2 days of work, which meant 2 days without tips. Murphy had been understanding, telling her to take all the time she needed, but Zara knew she couldn't afford to miss much more. That evening, as Emma slept peacefully, Zara stepped into the hallway to call Murphy and update him on Emma's condition. Thank God she's okay, Murphy said when Zara explained about the surgery. Don't you worry about work, see. Your job will be here when you're ready to come back. I can't afford to miss much more time, Zara said, exhaustion weighing down her voice. You can't afford not to take care of your daughter, Murphy said firmly. Money isn't everything, honey. But money was everything when you didn't have enough of it. Money was the difference between being able to pay for your child's medical care and going into debt that could take years to recover from. As Zara hung up the phone, she found herself thinking about Adrian for the first time in days. Not because she missed him, though she did, desperately, but because she remembered what he'd said about wanting to help people, about using his wealth for good causes. For one crazy moment, she considered calling him, swallowing her pride and asking for help from the man she'd pushed away. But the thought was gone almost as quickly as it came. She'd made her choice when she told him never to come back. She couldn't run to him now just because she needed money. The next morning brought more complications. Emma developed a low-grade fever during the night, which meant she needed to stay in the hospital for additional observation. Dr. Chin assured Zara it was probably nothing serious, just her body's way of recovering from the trauma of surgery, but it meant another day of hospital costs and another day away from work. Mommy, when can we go home? Emma asked weakly from her hospital bed. She looked so small surrounded by all the medical equipment, and Zara's heart broke a little more. Soon, sweetheart, Zara promised. As soon as the doctors say you're ready. I miss my room, Emma said. And Mr. Bear. Mr. Bear was Emma's favorite stuffed animal, left behind in their apartment in the rush to get to the hospital. Zara made a mental note to ask Mrs. Rodriguez, their neighbor, to pick him up when she went home to shower and change clothes. "I'll get Mr. Bear for you," Zara said, smoothing Emma's hair back from her forehead. "Everything's going to be okay, baby. I promise." But as she said the words, Zara wondered if she was making a promise she couldn't keep. The medical bills were mounting, she was missing work, and she had no idea how she was going to manage everything on her own. For the first time since Derek had left, Zara felt truly overwhelmed by the responsibility of single motherhood. She'd always been so proud of her independence, her ability to handle whatever life threw at her. But sitting in that hospital room watching her daughter sleep and worrying about bills she couldn't afford to pay, Zara felt more alone than she ever had in her life. What she didn't know was that across town, Adrian Cross was about to learn about Emma's hospitalization through a source she never would have expected. And when he did, nothing was going to stop him from helping the woman and child who had become more important to him than his entire fortune. The wheels of fate were turning, and sometimes the people we push away are the ones who refuse to give up on us, no matter how hard we try to convince them to leave. Adrian was reviewing quarterly reports in his office when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He almost ignored it, his personal number was closely guarded, and few people outside his inner circle had access to it. But something made him look at the message. "Mr. Cross, this is Murphy from Murphy's Diner. Zara's little girl is in the hospital. She's too proud to ask for help, but I thought you should know. Seattle Children's Hospital, room 314. Adrian stared at the message, his heart hammering against his ribs. Emma was in the hospital? What had happened? Why hadn't Zara called him? But even as the questions flooded his mind, Adrian was already moving. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the elevator, his assistant Jennifer calling after him about his afternoon meetings. "Cancel everything," he called back. "And Jennifer? Get me Dr. Richard Steinberg on the phone. Tell him it's urgent." Dr. Steinberg had been Adrian's family physician for years and sat on the board of several hospitals in Seattle. If anyone could find out what was happening with Emma Williams, it would be him. 20 minutes later, Adrian was pacing the hallway outside Seattle Children's Hospital, speaking quietly into his phone. "Appendectomy," Dr. Steinberg was saying. "Routine surgery, but the child developed a mild post-operative fever, so they're keeping her for observation. She should be fine, Adrian, but..." "But what?" Adrian demanded. "The family doesn't have adequate insurance coverage. They're looking at several $1,000s in medical bills, possibly more if there are complications." Adrian closed his eyes, imagining Zara's terror at facing such an enormous expense on a waitress's salary. "Can you arrange to have the bills transferred to me?" Quietly, without the mother knowing. "That's unusual, Adrian. Are you sure about this?" "Completely sure," Adrian said. "And Dr. Steinberg? I want the best pediatric care available. If Emma needs anything at all, I want her to have it." "I'll make some calls," Dr. Steinberg promised. After hanging up, Adrian stood in the hospital corridor, debating whether to go upstairs to room 314. Zara had made it clear she didn't want to see him, but her daughter was sick, and she was probably terrified and alone. The decision was made for him when he saw a familiar figure emerging from the elevator. Zara, looking exhausted and stressed, carrying a small overnight bag and a worn teddy bear. She looked terrible, Adrian thought with a pang of concern. Her hair was messy, her clothes wrinkled from sleeping in a hospital chair, and there were dark circles under her beautiful brown eyes. But she was still the most wonderful sight he'd seen in weeks. "Zara," he said softly. She spun around, her eyes widening with shock when she saw him. "Adrian? What are you doing here?" "Murphy texted me," Adrian said, holding up his phone. "He said Emma was in the hospital." A dozen emotions flickered across Zara's face, surprise, confusion, and something that might have been relief before she shuttered her expression. "She's fine," Zara said stiffly. "Just appendicitis. Routine surgery." "Can I see her?" Adrian asked. "I don't think that's a good idea," Zara said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Please," Adrian said simply. "I've been worried about both of you." Something in his tone must have gotten through to her, because after a long moment, Zara nodded. 5 minutes. She's been through enough without dealing with adult drama. Room 314 was bright and cheerful, decorated with cartoon characters and filled with flowers and balloons. Emma was awake, sitting up in bed and coloring in a book, looking small but alert. "Emma, sweetheart," Zara said gently, "there's someone here to see you. This is Adrian, the friend I told you about." Emma looked up with curious dark eyes that were exactly like her mother's. You're the gray-eyes man from the diner? She said matter-of-factly. Adrian felt his throat tighten. That's right. How are you feeling? My tummy hurts, but the doctor says I'm brave, Emma said proudly. Do you want to see my stitches? Emma, Zara said quickly, but Adrian was already moving closer to the bed. I'd love to see them, he said seriously. Battle scars are very important. As Emma showed off her bandages and explained the details of her surgery with 6-year-old enthusiasm, Adrian found himself falling completely in love with this brave little girl who was so much like her mother. She was smart and funny and resilient, and watching her made him understand even more why Zara was so fiercely protective of their small family. Mr. Adrian, Emma said suddenly, are you going to marry my mommy? Emma? Zara's face turned bright red. It's okay, Adrian said, meeting Emma's direct gaze. That would depend on whether your mommy wanted to marry me. She talks about you when she thinks I'm sleeping, Emma confided, ignoring her mother's mortified expression. She says you have kind eyes. Adrian looked at Zara, who was staring at the floor as if she wished it would swallow her whole. Does she? Emma, that's enough, Zara said firmly. Adrian needs to go now. But before Adrian could respond, Dr. Chin appeared in the doorway with a clipboard and a confused expression. Ms. Williams? I have some unusual news. Someone has arranged to cover all of Emma's medical expenses. The Children's Hope Foundation has approved an emergency grant for the full amount. Zara's head snapped up. What? But I just applied yesterday. You said it would take weeks to process. Normally it would, Dr. Chin said, looking puzzled. But apparently someone with significant influence made some calls. Your daughter's entire bill has been paid in full. Zara's eyes moved slowly from Dr. Chin to Adrian, and he saw the exact moment she realized what had happened. Her expression went through shock, gratitude, and then anger in quick succession. Could you give us a moment, please? She asked Dr. Chin, her voice dangerously calm. When they were alone, Zara turned to Adrian with fire in her eyes. You did this. The Children's Hope Foundation did this, Adrian said carefully. Don't lie to me, Zara said. Not now. You arranged this somehow. Adrian looked at Emma, who was watching the adult conversation with wide, concerned eyes. Can we talk about this outside? In the hallway, Zara's composure finally cracked. How dare you, she whispered furiously. How dare you swoop in and try to fix my problems with your money? Your daughter needed medical care, Adrian said quietly. You couldn't afford it. I could help, so I did. That's not your decision to make, Zara shot back. I didn't ask for your help. I specifically told you I didn't want your charity. This isn't charity, Adrian said firmly. This is someone who cares about you and Emma making sure you get the help you need. Someone who cares about me? Zara's laugh was bitter. You don't even know me, Adrian. You know the fantasy version you created in your head. I know you work 2 jobs to support your daughter, Adrian said, his voice rising slightly. I know you're proud and stubborn and terrified of depending on anyone. I know you'd rather go into debt than accept help, even when that help could change everything for you and Emma. And I know you think you can solve everything with money, Zara countered. But some things can't be bought, Adrian. Trust, respect, genuine affection. None of that comes with a price tag. Adrian stared at her, feeling like she'd just punched him in the chest. Is that really what you think? That I'm trying to buy your affection? What else am I supposed to think? Zara demanded. You show up here after weeks of silence and magically make all my problems disappear. How is that not trying to buy me? Because I love you. Adrian exploded, his voice echoing in the hospital corridor. Because I've been miserable for weeks without you, and when I found out Emma was sick, all I could think about was making sure you both were okay. The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest and completely unexpected. Zara stared at him, her anger faltering in the face of his obvious sincerity. You love me? She whispered. Yes, Adrian said simply. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you make everyone around you feel important. I love how you laugh at Murphy's terrible jokes and remember Mrs. Patterson's coffee preferences. I love that you're raising an incredible little girl who's brave and smart and everything good about you. Tears were streaming down Zara's face now, and Adrian reached up to gently wipe them away. I love you, Zara Williams, he said softly. Not because I think I can buy you, but because you're the first person who ever made me want to be better than I am. For a moment, Zara leaned into his touch, her eyes closing as if she was memorizing the feeling. But then she stepped back, shaking her head. Love isn't enough, she said brokenly. We're still from different worlds, Adrian. Emma's medical bills might be paid, but what about next time? What about all the other ways our lives don't fit together? Then we'll figure it out, Adrian said desperately. Together. We'll make our lives fit. But Zara was already backing away, her expression closing off again. I need to get back to Emma. Thank you for what you did, truly. But this doesn't change anything between us. As she disappeared back into Emma's room, Adrian leaned against the hospital wall and closed his eyes. He'd told her he loved her and she'd still walked away. Maybe she was right. Maybe love wasn't enough to bridge the gap between their different worlds. But as he stood there in the sterile hospital corridor, Adrian made himself a promise. He wasn't giving up. Not on Zara, not on Emma, and not on the possibility that sometimes love could be enough to overcome anything. He just had to figure out how to prove it to the woman who'd stolen his heart and then given it back broken. 2 days after Emma was discharged from the hospital, Zara was back at Murphy's diner, trying to lose herself in the familiar rhythm of work. But everything felt different now. The morning coffee routine felt empty without Adrian's presence, and she found herself looking up hopefully every time the bell above the door chimed. Emma was recovering well at home with Mrs. Rodriguez watching her, but even her daughter had asked several times about the gray-eyes man and when he might visit again. Zara didn't know how to answer. She'd spent the past month pushing Adrian away, convinced they were too different to make a relationship work, but his words in the hospital corridor kept echoing in her mind. I love you, Zara Williams. She'd heard those words before from Derek, but they'd never sounded the way they did when Adrian said them, desperate, honest, like they were being torn from his soul. You're doing it again, Murphy said, appearing beside her with a fresh pot of coffee. Doing what? Staring at that door like you're willing someone to walk through it, Murphy said gently. Maybe it's time to stop waiting and do something about it. I can't, Zara said, wiping down the counter for the third time. We're too different, Murphy. He lives in penthouses and boardrooms, and I live in a one-bedroom apartment and work 2 jobs. It'll never work. Says who? Murphy challenged. The only thing I see is 2 people who care about each other making things complicated when they don't need to be. Before Zara could argue, the diner's door chimed, and she looked up to see a man in an expensive suit entering. But it wasn't Adrian, it was a distinguished older gentleman she didn't recognize. Ms. Williams? He asked, approaching the counter. My name is Richard Walsh. I work with Adrian Cross. Could I speak with you for a moment? Zara's heart sank. Had Adrian sent his employee to tell her to stop bothering him? I'm working, she said stiffly. It will only take a moment, Richard said. It's about the Children's Hope Foundation. Against her better judgment, Zara found herself following Richard to a quiet booth in the back of the diner. He pulled out a folder and set it on the table between them. Adrian has asked me to establish a new program, Richard said. A foundation specifically designed to help single mothers with emergency medical expenses for their children. Zara stared at him. What does this have to do with me? He wants you to run it, Richard said simply. The salary would be equivalent to what you make at both your jobs combined plus benefits. You'd be helping families in situations similar to your own. The offer was so unexpected that Zara couldn't process it at first. He wants to give me a job? He wants to give you a purpose, Richard corrected. You'd be perfect for this position, Ms. Williams. You understand what these families are going through because you've lived it. And Adrian? Zara asked quietly. Would I be working with him? Richard shook his head. The foundation would be completely independent. Adrian would have no involvement in the day-to-day operations. He's removing himself entirely to avoid any appearance of conflict of interest. Zara looked down at the job description in the folder. It was everything she'd never dared to dream of: meaningful work, good pay, the chance to help other families avoid the terror she'd felt when Emma was sick. But it also meant accepting help from Adrian, which felt too much like charity. I need to think about it, she said finally. Of course, Richard said, standing to leave. But Ms. Williams? For what it's worth, I've worked with Adrian for 8 years, and I've never seen him care about anything the way he cares about this foundation. Or about you. After Richard left, Zara sat in the booth staring at the job offer, her mind racing. Was this Adrian's way of taking care of her from a distance? Another attempt to solve her problems with money? Or was it something more, a genuine recognition of her abilities and a chance to build something meaningful? That evening, as she tucked Emma into bed, her daughter brought up the subject that had been on both their minds. Mommy, why don't you call Mr. Adrian? Emma asked. If you miss him and he misses you, why can't you be together? It's complicated, sweetheart, Zara said, smoothing Emma's hair. But you said complications are just problems that need solutions. Emma pointed out with 6-year-old logic. What's the problem? Zara was quiet for a moment, considering her daughter's question. What was the problem really? That Adrian was wealthy and she wasn't? That seemed less important now than it had a month ago. That he'd lied to her? He hadn't really, he'd just been a regular person trying to have a normal relationship. The problem, Zara said slowly, is that I'm scared. Of what? Of getting hurt again. Of trusting someone and having them leave like Daddy did. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this with the serious concentration she brought to all important matters. But Mr. Adrian isn't Daddy, she said finally. He has kind eyes. And he made you happy. Out of the mouths of babes, Zara thought. Emma was right, Adrian wasn't Derek. He'd never given her any reason to doubt his sincerity except for the wealth and status that had nothing to do with the man she'd fallen in love with. The next morning, instead of going to the diner, Zara found herself standing in the lobby of the Cross Industries building, clutching the job offer in her hand and trying to work up the courage to go upstairs. She'd called ahead and been told that Mr. Cross was in meetings all morning, which was perfect. She didn't want to see him, not yet. She just wanted to return the job offer and explain why she couldn't accept it. But when the elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor, Zara was surprised to find the reception area empty except for a woman she assumed was Adrian's assistant. Ms. Williams? The woman asked, standing immediately. I'm Jennifer. Mr. Cross is expecting you. But I called and you said he was in meetings, Zara said, confused. Jennifer smiled. He canceled them when he heard you were coming. Right this way. Before Zara could protest, she was being led down a hallway lined with expensive artwork and into a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Seattle skyline. Adrian was standing with his back to the door, looking out at the city, and he didn't turn around when she entered. He looked tired, Zara noticed, and somehow smaller than she remembered, despite the expensive suit and commanding office. You came, he said quietly, still not turning around. I came to return this, Zara said, setting the job offer on his desk. It's generous, but I can't accept it. Why not? Adrian asked, finally turning to face her. His gray eyes looked as tired as the rest of him, and Zara felt her heart clench at the obvious pain there. Because it feels like charity, she said honestly. And because I don't want you to feel like you have to take care of me. What if I want to take care of you? Adrian asked. What if taking care of you and Emma is the only thing that makes me happy anymore? The raw honesty in his voice made Zara's breath catch. Adrian? I've been miserable without you, he continued, stepping closer. I can't sleep, I can't focus on work, I can't think about anything except the way you smiled when I made you laugh. I miss our morning conversations. I miss hearing about Emma's latest adventure. I miss feeling like I matter to someone for who I am instead of what I own. You do matter, Zara whispered. You matter so much that it scares me. Then don't be scared, Adrian said, reaching for her hands. Let me love you, Zara. Let me be part of your life, part of Emma's life. I don't care if we figure it out as we go along. Zara looked down at their joined hands, his soft and hers marked with small scars from years of hard work. But somehow they fit together perfectly. What about the foundation job? She asked. Take it if you want it, not because I offered it, Adrian said. You'd be amazing at it and it would help so many families. But even if you turn it down, I still love you. Even if you tell me to leave you alone again, I'll still love you. The certainty in his voice broke through the last of Zara's defenses. This man, this complicated, wealthy, powerful man loved her. Not because she was easy or convenient, but because she was herself. And maybe Emma was right. Maybe love really could solve any problem if two people were willing to work together. I love you too, she said softly, and watched Adrian's face transform with joy. Does that mean you'll give us a chance? He asked hopefully. It means I'm tired of being scared, Zara said. It means I want to see what happens when we stop fighting this and start building something together. Adrian's smile was brighter than the Seattle sunshine streaming through his office windows. What about Emma? Will she be okay with this? Are you kidding? Zara laughed. She's been asking about you constantly. I think she's half in love with you already. Only half. Adrian teased, pulling Zara closer. I'll have to work on that. As he leaned down to kiss her, Zara felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't felt in years, the sense that she was exactly where she belonged. It didn't matter that Adrian was a billionaire and she was a waitress. It didn't matter that their lives had started in different worlds. What mattered was that they'd found each other, and they were both brave enough to choose love over fear. 6 months later, Zara stood in the backyard of Adrian's lake house. watching Emma teach him how to braid friendship bracelets while she directed the preparations for their small wedding ceremony. The Children's Hope Foundation had helped over 100 families in its first 6 months, and Zara had never felt more fulfilled in her work. Murphy was walking her down the aisle, Mrs. Patterson was doing a reading, and Emma was the flower girl, wearing a dress she'd designed herself with lots of sparkles because it's a princess day. As the ceremony began and Zara saw Adrian waiting for her at the altar, his gray eyes bright with love and happiness, she knew that sometimes fairy tales did come true. You just had to be brave enough to believe in them. And as they exchanged vows promising to love each other through whatever challenges life might bring, both Zara and Adrian knew they'd found something worth more than all the money in the world. They'd found their happily ever after.